he never forgot where he came from. And also as a friend. In 1973, 50 years ago, as a young state representative, Mickey Leland was a colleague of mine. We were friends. And it was very special that Mickey asked me to meet George Foreman for a photograph and a visit. George had won the Olympics in '68. He had just become the world heavyweight champion. I was in such awe of him. He had hair then, I had hair then. And he and I cherished that picture many times through the year. And what I remember most, certainly remaining in contact periodically through our careers, of all the traits that I could mention, his faith, his family, his boxing career, certainly his business career, the one that stands out to me as a friend of George Foreman, he never forgot where he came from. That is so significant for someone that reached such acclaim and worldwide recognition. He knew and recognized it started in Houston, Texas, and Fifth Ward, Texas. For our guests from out of town, Fifth Ward's about 4 or 5 miles northeast of here, historically neglected community. And about a year ago, George called me. I'd just been sworn in as mayor, and he said, Mayor John, I want you to come out to the house because I want to discuss with you how we can partner to give youth across Houston the opportunity that I received. Now, you remember, George dropped out of Wheatley High when he was 15 years old. Got a second chance of joining the Job Corps. It was a great society opportunity to give young men and women a second chance. He went to San Marcos, got his GED, was recognized for his athletic skills. So he asked me about a year ago, what could we do together? How could we use his ministry to assist young people with an education, health care, job training? It was special. Certainly anyone would welcome, certainly the mayor of this great city, George Foreman, would partner with our city, allow me to be in his presence, to travel this city, mentor young people like he was doing. And of course, he passed too soon. He and I shared the vision, and I want to publicly say today, his vision will live on. I am committed to George's vision across Houston, certainly the community in which he grew up. His church was located in northeast Houston, very close to where he went to school. So let me just ask everyone present today, join me in carrying out George Foreman's mission for young people, not only in Houston, but across the United States and the world. So let me, before I sit down, we did a proclamation at the city this week. It's present. It speaks of his success story, his love for his family, his business success, but really remembering where he came from. So I, John Whitmire, Mayor of the City of Houston, do by here claim April 14th is George Foreman Day in the entire city of Houston.
Hello, dear friends. I'm George Foreman. Most of you know me as the old boxing champ. I won an Olympic gold medal in 1968. It was in Mexico City that I raised a small American flag while representing my country. I went on from there to win the World Heavyweight Championship in 1973. But it was in 1977 that I had the most dynamic experience of my life. In March of that year, within hours, I was transformed from one man to another. You see, I tasted what every young man fears most, death. For years, I had prepared for what all of us wish to attain, long life. And because I wanted more than others, I did more, like getting a good night's rest, eating healthy foods, and exercising for long hours. Yes, my life really began after a boxing match. A boxing match in which I felt I had won. No boxer ever believes it when he loses, so at that, I'm no different. I got back to my dressing room that night in March of 1977 and tried to cool off, as I had done so many times before, but I couldn't. Thoughts of the unbelievable, death, entered my mind. I fought a silent fight to keep all I'd ever called my own, my life. I wanted to live as much as any other person. I had not seen any of the great wonders of the world. At 28 years old, all I'd ever seen in religion from my childhood, I felt, was weakness. So as much as I tried, I always came up with, it can't be real. Though I would say from time to time, there must be a God somewhere. If he lives, he has got to be with me because I was rich and there were so many that were poor. Well, that night in the dressing room, I lost my fight with death. I heard a voice within me ask, if you believe in God, why are you scared to die? I was afraid. I had not said goodbye to my mother or my children. Okay, I said, I believe in God, but not enough to... Before I could say die, I was out of this life. In a vision, in a split second, I was dead. Under my feet, above my head, and all around me was nothing but nothing. All of my days I had prepared for life. Now, I was dead. No one to help me as in life. Nothing but loneliness and hopelessness. Everything I had worked for years was as ashes crumbling behind me. I don't care if this is death. I still believe there's a God, I said. Then I was alive again in that dressing room. This time I knew there was God and that he had helped me. I did not care about anything else. It's so hard to put into words what happened to me. So I have to write with my heart about what did and what has become of my life. And today, my hope is that with these songs, I declare the love of God. Please listen to the songs I have written.
Welcome, family, friends, fellow mourners. Houston, we have a problem. We no longer have that broad, beaming smile of George Foreman here with us. But I want to talk to you about his philosophy in having that smile all the time. I was looking through earlier this morning a little book that he wrote in about 2009 called Going the Extra Smile. George said that wherever he was, be it on the streets of New York or Los Angeles or Marshall, Texas, he'd turn around and somebody'd be saying, "Hey, George." He'd wave and give them the biggest smile he ever had. He became famous for that. He said invariably the people would smile back at him, and that's what it was all about. He decided that rather than being the scowling younger person, the frowner he once was, he would be known for that happy face. And did he ever make that stick? There's no question about it. We all know about the history of George. It goes on. He's, in my estimation, one of the greatest Texans there's ever been, indeed one of the greatest Americans. He was a citizen of the world. Big Wheel, one of his sons, and I were talking recently, as was I with Red, that this is an occasion not only for family, but for the world, because he belonged to the world. Yes, now he belongs to the ages, but let's think a little bit about the earlier things that made him famous and how he was able to, based upon those, build a foundation to go forward and to become what I believe, who I believe was one of the greatest ambassadors our world has ever seen. You don't have to leave the television on too long or read too many newspapers to know, to realize that the world indeed is full of hiccups today. Were we to have more George Foreman, that problem would be somewhat massaged. I can't say eradicated, but would sure be better. He dedicated the latter years of his life in wanting to make a better world for everybody. I think it's very fitting that here on the first day of Holy Week that we're able to have this homegoing program. George Foreman loved Jesus. He was a great reborn Christian. I've thought about what people in the Bible that George reminded me most of, and of course we can all look to the Old Testament and think about the strength of Samson, the leadership of Moses taking the downtrodden out of bondage, out of the wilderness. I'll give you a little homework assignment. Look in your New Testament and read a bit about Barnabas, because Barnabas reminds me of George in part. Obviously, also, we've got to think in the New Testament about Lazarus, because if anybody ever had a near death, and in his own estimation, a death and return from death experience, it was George. There's so many people that have been here in our world in the past, say 75 years or more, that influenced George, that he reminds me of, such as starting back with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, moving up to Lyndon B. Johnson, Martin Luther King Jr. There were so many people that wanted to help the shortchanged, the downtrodden, by perhaps moving that jar of jam to a lower shelf where the little person could have a taste and get the inspiration for perhaps working to seek what it would take to have that for himself or herself. Indeed, George implemented that during his lifetime. He knew when he was 15 or 16 years old that his course was not the straight and narrow it should be, and he couldn't seem to change it. He graduated from cheap wine to cheap gin and beating up people in the bloody Fifth Ward, robbing them of money, and he knew that was bad. It broke his mother Nancy's heart. But they sat down together after seeing, going back again to Lyndon Johnson, who started a program here in these United States for such downtrodden people wanting a second chance, called it the Job Corps. His mama signed him up for that, and that began the turnaround. He went the first time he'd ever seen up close an airplane, much less been on one, and they flew him to Oregon to begin that program. He had finally made up his mind when his hero, the great football player, first for Syracuse in college and then for Cleveland Browns, Jim Brown, got on TV, and he saw the ad and said, "If you need a second chance, this is it. You must take it." George realized he couldn't do it on his own, but that he wanted to do that. The family was behind him, and he promised his mother that he would never disappoint her again if he was able indeed to come out of that abyss in which he'd been cast. George went on, as we know, to in 1968 become the Olympic heavyweight champion, won the gold medal, defeated the highly vaunted and much favored Russian. Went on to, of course, become the heavyweight world champion, and later on, some years, do so again at the oldest age anyone ever had. He met with the gentleman over here, the very great person and champion, Michael Moore, at that time. Funny story, later on, even when he was older, 55, he and I were talking about, George got to think, well, you know, I'm in pretty good shape still. I might try for a third comeback at age 55. Joan cut her eyes at him and did this. He said, no, you're not. But we tried. We talked about we can build it up. You can get on the road again. You can start pulling a Jeep behind you, and you can start chopping trees, and you can get in that good shape again, and we'll advertise you on TV as how many push-ups can you do in 10 minutes without stopping? George said, no, it'll sell better if we get on there and say, how many cheeseburgers can I push down in 30 minutes without stopping? George loved cheeseburgers. He had a hunger fixation ever since back when he was a kid. And I'll tell you a little bit more about cheeseburger in a minute, perhaps. Every Saturday before lunch, we would have a telephone call. We'd start off talking about horses. George loved horses. I don't remember whether it was Will Rogers or might have been Teddy Roosevelt or Winston Churchill, but one of them is given credit for saying there's something good about the outside of a horse for the inside of a person. And George subscribed to that. He loved all kinds of horses. He had Lippy's Honors, he had thoroughbreds, saddlebreds, standardbred, Tennessee walking horses. That's the way we became friends and knew each other over a quarter century ago, was by virtue of our common interest in the horses. Our phone conversation would then evolve to old pocket knives. He loved pocket knives and old pocket watches. Then he'd always give me a lesson, a Bible verse, or ask me what I thought about this or that. This particular season, he always loved, we'd be talking about it's getting time for a trail ride. We always had up at our property up in East Texas and Nacogdoches a trail ride for him and his family about Easter time in October. He loved Easter for the obvious reason that it was the time of the crucifixion and the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. George looked at it in the manner that he felt that the Lord had completed his earthly experience, his assignment, and was ready to go on to heaven. And he had an acronym that he liked called JOY. The acronym, the first letter, J, he said should always be Jesus. The second letter, O, for others. The third, Y, for yourself. And that's the order he wanted everything to be in, and I think that is the way he lived his life. One of his other great heroes was Roy Rogers, who, as you probably know, if you're anywhere near my advantage, was the king of the TV Cowboys. And he had a song that he loved to sing, Happy Trails to You. And happy trails to you, George, until we meet again.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank Joan and the family for allowing me to say a few words about George. George was boxing when I met him, but I never knew George, the boxer. I only knew George as the man. People always ask me, how did you meet George? We grew up in the same neighborhood, so most, oh, you grew up with, no, George, 5 years younger than me. He was a little boy when I was growing up. But when I met George, I came to understand that George was pure. A lot of people, and even he says when he was young, he was a bad boy. But I realized George was never a bad boy. When he was young, he was a good boy who did bad things. He says he was converted. He was never converted. George was always good. He just learned who he really was. He learned his foundation. How did I meet George? George started giving me money when I was dean of law school. Didn't know him, never met him, get checks in the mail. When I became president, George gave me a large contribution to the university. I called Nancy, the person that I'd been communicating with all these years, and I said, Nancy, I have to meet George. I have to talk to George. I have to personally thank him for all the contributions he's made to Texas Southern University. And she said, the only way George will meet you if you come to church. If you come to church, he will talk to you afterwards. At that time, Nancy didn't know that I made a contract with myself. At 19 years old, I walked out of the church. So for the rest of my life, I had to explain to people, I didn't leave God. I left the church because I couldn't deal with all the hypocrisy in the church. But I went to George's sermon, went to his church, heard him preach. We talked afterwards. I really liked what he said, and so I went back the next Sunday. Another very, very moving sermon for me. So that Wednesday, my secretary buzzed me. She said, George Foreman is here to see you. I said, George Foreman? She said, yes. So George came in, and I said, George, you know, I'm not always in my office. I have meetings. I'm out of town. I said, in order to make sure that I'm here, it might be a good idea if you make an appointment. He said, you didn't make an appointment when you came to church. So that's how our friendship started. I want to do two things. First, I want to read something, scripture from the Bible. I know it's not church, but this is what brought George and I together. Now, this encounter that Jesus had with the Pharisees is in Matthew, Luke, and John. All right? I always tell people, my name is James Matthew Douglas, so I like to count in Matthew. And so that's what I'm going to read from the 22nd chapter of Matthew, 36 through the 40th verse. And one of the Pharisees said to Jesus, Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first of the great commandments. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. That's how George lived his life. And I realized that's what I was looking for. You know, I know a lot of people in the church said, why did the president of the university start just coming to our church? I started coming to the church because I finally found somebody who believed like me. Religion and Christianity shouldn't be complex. It's just two simple things. Love God and love thy fellow man. I know Michael Harris always talk about George being the love man because he preached love all the time. That's what this life is all about. It's all about love. And George was pure because George lived and believed what he preached. So that's how George and I became friends. George was always volunteering me to do things. I had to explain to Natalie because I kept bugging her. I said, Natalie, I'm bugging you because your father somehow told everybody, if you want to talk to me, you got to go through Douglas first. So everybody blows me up every time they wanted something from George. But those of you are old enough to remember, when AIDS was really big, when AIDS first started, it was really ravishing the African American community. But because AIDS was first identified as a gay disease, most African Americans stayed away from it. So George came to me and he said, look, he said, I want to do something for the NAACP. He said, I'm making a lot of money, and I want to make sure I don't want to be like other athletes. I know that I'm making a lot of money because of people like Martin Luther King and the NAACP, and so I want to contribute something to the NAACP. So George ended up contributing $200,000. And at the meeting, he asked me to read this, and I'm going to read you what he asked me to read. It's very short, but it shows what George was all about. And it says, my brothers and sisters in the struggle, with the ushering in of a new millennium and century, and so this is 2000. The easiest thing for a successful man to say is, look what I have done, as if we accomplished everything by ourselves. And for the most part, history is like that. I too have accomplished a lot, but with the help of God, my fellow man, and most importantly, with the aid of the NAACP. NAACPers are among the bravest of them all, those who put their lives on hold, their families in danger, and their love of American freedom first. So that I and so many other younger black Americans can say, look what I have done. To the NAACP, I say, thank you. That was George. That was George. George gave money to a lot of different organizations. You wouldn't believe it. But the thing that brought me to George was his love for God and his love for everybody else on the face of this earth. He's a wonderful man.
Good morning. I'm Aidan Rios, and I've been George's friend. Honorable Mayor John Whitmire, officers of the City of Houston, dear Mary, your children, family, and friends. George lived by Jesus' commandment that you love one another as I have loved you. George abided by Jesus' definition of a friend. Greater love had no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friend. George loved us and was ready to give his life for his friends, for you, anytime, anywhere. I met George during the AIDS crisis, and AIDS patients were his friends in Jesus' sense of friendship. He was ready to give his life for them. He asked me one day, he said, "Doc, where do they get food when they cannot work?" Food was important for George. I said, "In the usual places." George bought land and created the most beautiful food bank for AIDS patients. When he had the first opportunity for a championship, the refusal for a rematch gave him $1 million in a court. The next day, he went to MD Anderson and gave $1.7 million donated for the adolescent unit in the ICU for adolescent pediatric patients with cancer. And somebody asked at the time, "George, why 7?" His answer was who he was. He said, "Stars give round numbers. I am a working man." The George Foreman Adolescent Unit of MD Anderson was blood and sweat given in the spirit of Jesus' friendship. Over the years, George talked to thousands of patients. Thousands of patients. How do I know? I place the calls. Anytime, any day, he never said no, and he always brought hope, faith, and love. At the last fight, in the middle of the celebration, a hand pulled the head of George to the side and planted a kiss, a gentle kiss of his head. It was Michael Moore. That picture tells the story, the beautiful story of these two champions and who they are. He loved my country, Panama. Walking out of the dressing room, he had the presence of mind of telling me, "The reason I asked you to wear that t-shirt is because I want the world to know that a man from Panama was in my corner." On an interview last year, somebody said, "George, can you send a message to Panama?" And in his beautiful voice, he said, "Hello, Panama. This is George Foreman. I love you so much that I can feel your heartbeat." Oh my God, when that tape got to Panama, everybody said, "George for president." Love from Jesus' best friend That was yours for the world and for each of you. Thank you.
Now I'd like to take a moment to introduce a multiple division world heavyweight champion. We have more title belts in this room, my goodness. Michael Moore.
Hello, everyone. Well, I will forever be connected to George Foreman. We went from being competitors in 1994 to having a relationship built on respect for over 30 years. George is boxing royalty, Olympic gold medalist and a two-time heavyweight champion, and also an inductee into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. This man fought competitively in 4 separate decades. The older George smiled all the time. We remember that smile, right? Do not be fooled. When that bell rung, he was all business. What's so funny? For real? Oh, I'm joking. George then introduced himself to another generation of boxers and fans as an analyst for HBO Boxing. George was a champion in life. His faith transformed a shy country boy from Texas to a successful businessman and a voice for the less fortunate. His capacity to reinvent himself, learn from the past, and re-engage with the world shaped boxing and the public for over 50 years. We should all learn from the life of George. We should all learn from the life that George led. Rest well, champ. Thank you.
Now is the time to say to all my friends and fans, I found that old saying, all things are possible if you only believe, all so true. Having to look up one day severely overweight, financially devastated, and with a host of children and family members to support, I was faced with the impossible. You see, most of my life I had been told, you cannot get an education, you cannot play certain sports, you can't get a job, and you can never be heavyweight champion of the world. Well, in life, as hard as it was sometimes, I was able to prove otherwise. But there were some things even I had to let go because I had heard too many others say I could not. I was ordained a preacher in 1978 at the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ. I started preaching to all about the great love of God, how he had always come to the rescue of so many in old times. And today, as always, he is here for us. But now, having told so many men and women who after long marriages and lost loved ones, sure you have lost your loved ones, but God is there. God is there to help you. Keep living. He will make a way. A brighter day is coming. You see, as a preacher, you must sell and sell every day. Now, it was I who was old and penniless. It was I who had to buy the product I had been selling for years. You can, George, even when others said, you are going to get hurt, you're too old, it's impossible. Well, at the age of 45, with the help of Almighty God, I became the oldest man to become heavyweight champion of the world. The moment it happened, I fell to my knees and thanked God above. I said, thank you, Jesus, for what he had done for me. Now, as you approach life and those immovable walls that comes with time, please remember me, George Foreman, remember that I said, if you can dream it, you can do it. Does not matter what they say.
Once years ago, I was seeking to please myself, but then God showed me Jesus. Now that is all I got left. He walked into my life, and He ain't been the same since. Jesus gave me water that only I knew, that only I knew. I thirsted for. So I gave Him my life, I gave Him my life. I gave Jesus Christ my life for the love that He showed me. So I gave Him my life, I gave Him my life. I gave Jesus Christ my life for the love that He showed me. So many people don't know He's alive, and so many people don't even know that He exists, and that He died on a cross for all of us, for all of lost. So I gave him my life. I gave him my life. I gave Jesus Christ my life for the love that he showed me. So I gave him my life. I gave him my life. I gave Jesus Christ my life for the love that he showed me. And I lean on Jesus for my rest, and when times get hard, he sends me a little laughter. So I gave him my life.
So he gave him his life. He gave him his life. He gave Jesus Christ his life for the love that he showed him. So he gave him his life. He gave him his life. He gave Jesus Christ his life for the love that he showed him.
So I gave him my life. I gave him my life. I gave Jesus Christ my life for the love that he showed me. So I gave him my life. I gave him my life. I gave Jesus Christ my life for the love that he showed me. I gave him my life.
Throughout my life, I have been fortunate enough to set and accomplish many goals. As a teenager, I was an Olympic gold medalist. In the span of 20 years, I was twice the heavyweight champion of the world. Often, I have been asked, where did you get the courage, physical strength, and spiritual motivation to achieve so much? To be a champion, there are three things we all need. Number one is faith in the man upstairs. Because when all else fails, there has always been for me the falling down on my knees, even with all my fears requesting his mercy. Then there is the mirror, that big thing we all have to look in most every morning, whether half asleep or fully awake. We see the person who really controls our destiny. Knowing no matter how others see us, we've got to be content with the face. Winning and losing can never assure a lasting smile. But saying to the face you see daily, I did my best, can. Of course, like any other athlete, I had to practice and push my body to the extremes. But to be able to get off my back, reach for the rope, and pull myself up time after time in life, I needed words. Words that I could hear through my loneliness. When you reach for the stars so many times, you are alone with heartaches, disappointments, and even grief. I needed words that would renew, refresh, and restore my very soul. with these same special words that have helped me throughout the years, I have written songs that if you listen will help you as well as your loved ones reach as I did for the stars.
If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or a song, if I can show somebody he is traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring back beauty to a world abroad, if I can spread love's message that the Master taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain.
I'm George Foreman. How well do I remember how Jesus brought me through. I prayed, I walked a night or two. I said, Lord, why don't you take and use me? That's all that I can do. I give my life to Jesus. What about you? That was a song my grandmother gave to my father. He was going through a hard time. So now I've given it to you. My he's not just my dad, he was my friend and my mentor. Same as to my brothers. He didn't build a corporation, a true corporation with board members and whatnot. He grabbed us all as boys. It's time for you to get to work. I turned